Okay, well, thank you, Rebecca. Good morning, everybody. So, where are we coming from with this? Lung damage, the theme of the day, as it were. So, within the UK, it's over 100 fatal cancers per year. So, it's a really sobering thought. 1,000 fatal cancers that essentially, from what we've seen already, are preventable. So under UK regulations, James Taylor from the HSE has given a thorough overview of the actual regulations. The law is quite straightforward. Fundamentally, radon has to be assessed in the workplace, including people working from home. And there's some really useful information on the HSE website and associated links at that link there. So some really good information there for people watching. So what John and I are going to talk about over the next few minutes, I'll talk a little bit about the workplace risk assessments for home workers, what we've done for ourselves in the business and what advice we give to clients. And then a couple of quite a little bit different case studies with respect to radon and thoron from radium and thorium legacies that we've been involved with. We're very fortunate in Aurora that because of the work that we do, lots of variety, lots of different things to do with radiation protection and radon and thoron, but radon is becoming quite an interesting one with the homework and the clients' questions. And it's great that the HSE have actually presented that. It's something that we can point our clients and other contacts in the direction of. When I was putting the presentation together with John, I went through some old pictures, and I'm not that old that they're just black and white pictures. I think it was the theme of the photographer at the time. He or she was really into doing black and whites. Picture on the left, that's young Glenn in the radon chamber at the National Radiological Protection Board. Quite a while ago, involved in the international intercomparisons of passive detectors. And then the picture on the right, just doing some processing and analysing of those detectors. So what do we actually get involved with as a business? It's a combination of lots of different things with respect to radon at work and radon at home. And it's not just radon from natural sources, i.e. the ground. We get involved in quite a few interesting projects with respect to radon from items of contamination, radium legacies, etc. We have various pieces of equipment, and we utilise some of the sponsors today using their passive detectors. Ideally, the 3-month passive measurement is ideal, but on lots and lots of occasions, we don't have that luxury where a client really needs to know the radon levels much sooner than that. So we use things like canaries as active monitors, and a really useful piece of kit is the AlphaGuard. And the pictures at the bottom, John will talk more about some of the interesting work that we've been involved with thorium from gas mantles and legacies. So how do we go about actually doing the radon aspect of the risk assessment for working from home? Pre-pandemic, we had, tongue-in-cheek, 2 officers, and we now have 23 officers, you could argue. So essentially the way of assessing it is very straightforward. Those are the boys and the girls on the map of where we all live, work from, etc. And the image on the right, at the time, it's the Public Health England, now changed their name. I'm sure Tracy will tell us more about that later on the right. So it's fortunate-ish that the majority of our team are not actually in the radon-affected areas. So the way that we've gone about this, we'd already done, or the homeowners had already done quite a few of the radon measurements anyway. So we took the decision where appropriate, we'd look at the radon affected area aspect of where people actually lived, and we did it as a useful exercise. We used passive, the PHE 3-month passive monitors, and put them into every employee's home where they were in the radon affected areas. We also took into account their home working arrangements, and none of our employees have got a luxury basement, man or woman cave, shall we say, and we don't have any cellars that we know of. Interestingly, when the results came back, we also, or rather John did, use the Canary and the AlphaGuard. And the Canary in the active integrated mode gave an excellent reading with respect to the passive, very, very similar average radon levels. Interestingly as well, in John's home, when John gets up early in the morning, the radon level is much higher, and that's an unusual pattern that the radon levels build up overnight. So on average, we were very fortunate as a business that we didn't have any significant radon levels at people's homes where they were working. But fundamentally, it's essential that we do the risk assessment, and radon is only a small part of the actual working from home risk assessment. And as James mentioned, it's the other aspects of working from home with ergonomics, regular breaks, ventilation, not cramped in the same position for 8 or 10 hours, etc. And it's not looking at radon in isolation, but definitely documenting and making sure that you've actually done the assessment and keeping it on file in case, James does knock on the door. What are you doing about the radon at home, guys? So the advice that we've been giving to clients is essentially as per what the HSE are recommending. It's do the radon risk assessment as part of home working. And for us and for lots of other clients that we've got with similar small numbers of employees, very straightforward, and not too time consuming or expensive. However, where we have some bigger clients that have got premises and home workers in radon affected areas and clients with thousands of employees, it can be quite a significant undertaking. And it's going to be interesting how regulations are checked, stroked, enforced. So it's an interesting one, but there's some really good information on working at home risk assessment on the HSE website. And lastly, it's a shame that James has gone. I was just going to say a thank you to James, probably 20 years plus overdue. James gave me a really useful lesson pre-Aurora that fundamentally compliance is judged on evidence. So we encourage all of our clients, ourselves as well, of always documenting and keeping a record of that risk assessment and keeping it live, shall we say. John.
Thanks, Glenn. So I wanted to finish by talking about a couple of projects which involved exposure to radon and some of the hazards from radon, not from natural exposure, but due to contamination of premises and contamination in the ground. And the first one I wanted to share with you is a hospital project, hospital that have been involved in the very early pioneering uses of radium for cancer treatment. And you can see the photograph there on the right, the preparation system for preparing radium capsules for administering to patients, and some very effective cancer treatments using radium seeds and so on. And they were using quite significant quantities of radium. You can see there 1.5 curies in the logbook there on a particular day being stored at the hospital. And because the radium was very valuable and they were concerned about premises being bombed during the war, they would store the radium in deep boreholes. And so we were asked to come in and have a look at some of these rooms and areas of the hospital, and the borehole as well that have been used to store the radium. And one of the things about a facility where there's been storage of radium, it's not just the contamination from the radium itself. Clearly, it's emitting radon gas. That radon gas is able to permeate out through a safe that might be used to contain the radium. And you can see the picture on the left there, which is where we're trying to remove all the building materials that have been affected by this permeation. The radium decays to radon gas, the radon permeates through the brick and the concrete, and you're left with some long-lived decay products, things like lead-210, which have quite a long half-life and will just sit in the material. So you can see there's quite a lot of material that had to be removed there just from the storage of radium in the safe in the middle. The photograph in the center is the borehole that was used to store the radium, and the picture on the right there is the bogey that goes up and down the borehole, 16 meters deep, which is a terrifically deep borehole. And there was some, that bogey is very highly contaminated just from the radium. But also then the borehole itself had a lot of these long-lived decay products from emanation of the radon gas and then permeation through some of the construction materials. So we could decontaminate things like the bogey and the transfer system, but in order to decontaminate the borehole, we had to use an aggressive rotary wire brush with an air filtration and vacuum system in a tented enclosure, so that we could stir up the contamination with the aggressive brush and then bring that contaminated air through a filtration system to remediate the radioactivity. So that was an example of radium. The other project I wanted to share with you was about thoron, and thoron's really a gas that we don't think about very much, because in the natural environment, it's only a very small proportion of the radiation exposure is from thoron gas. But there are situations, if we have a lot of thorium contamination, then thoron gas can start to become an issue. And an example of this is Victorian gas mantle factories. Particularly popular in London in Victorian times, gas mantles used ubiquitously, and thorium and asbestos were buried on site. Also, the factory itself tended to be demolished and then just built over, so the building materials weren't removed from the site, and so we got quite significant levels of thorium contamination. So we would start with a walkover survey looking for gamma emissions from the thorium, either on foot or a trolley system or a vehicle system. That would then give us a heat map of where the thorium contamination is on the site, and where we thought that might impact with buildings. Then we could do some thoron measurements. And thoron has quite a short half-life, 55 seconds, compared to radon with its 3.8 days. But if we've got high levels of thorium contamination, then even with the short half-life, we can still get some significant thoron doses. And measuring for thoron is slightly more complicated than radon. We need to use a pair of passive detectors. One detector has a filter, a delay filter, which means that the thoron is delayed in getting to the detector, and so we just measure the radon. And then the other detector doesn't have that delay filter, so we get the radon plus the thoron. We then subtract the radon and we get the thoron measurement. And we found levels of thoron gas up to 250 becquerels per cubic meter on some of these sites. And then when we did the occupational data to look at how long people were spending in those areas. We could do a dose assessment and found that people could be getting up to 8 millisieverts a year from thoron exposure. And there are no thoron action levels in the legislation, so we based our advice on a combination of the radon action levels and the dose assessment, which then fed into the radiation risk assessment. So there's just a couple of projects I wanted to share with you where the contamination from radium and thorium gives rise to the thoron or radon gas exposure.
Thanks, John. I'd just say thank you to Rebecca and colleagues for the opportunity to share some of our information, and there we go.
Thanks very much, John and Glenn. Really interesting to find out there's a bit more to it, and it's not just natural radon coming from the ground. And yeah, there's a lot more to it that we could be looking at, related fields. I've got one question. We're running a bit behind time, so I'll keep it quick. Given what Aaron Gadazi said earlier about hesitancy in carrying out a radon test, and particularly how that was the group that was slowest to act was men, and was people with a scientific background, chemists, physicists, geologists. What was the reaction like in your workplace when you and all your colleagues were asked to test their homes? Did they welcome? Was there any hesitancy?
Yeah, we're all radiation nerds, Rebecca. So the opportunity to take an AlphaGuard into your house and start measuring your radon levels was, yeah, pretty much seized upon by everybody. So no, we were all quite keen to figure out what the hazards were.
No hesitancy.
Yeah.
And what about with any of your clients? Have people been receptive to it, or is it just seen as an additional cost? And until someone comes and tells me, or asks HSE, come knocking on the door asking, have you done this?
John, it's a mixture. Some clients are very proactive. They've done it already as part of their homework and risk assessment. They see it as a significant investment looking after their employees. And then the end of the spectrum.
Okay, interesting. Well, I think as it becomes more commonplace to work at home, people, health and safety advisors who aren't then doing their risk assessments about the workplace, the physical office, I think their attention is going to be more drawn to homes and what they need to be doing there. So thanks very much, both of you. Great to have you joining us today.